Hello, all. How are you? While we are waiting for all of our audience to tune in, please do comment in the comment on the right hand side chat box about where you're from and what's the weather like at your place. I'm tuning in from Gurgaon in India. Uh, it's really hot and humid here, despite we'll, we are well within the monsoon season. But I know in the southern part of the country, it's raining cats and dogs. So yeah, do tune in, do add in your comments. It would be good to read them. But look forward to this discussion today. Hello. Let's give it a minute or two. Let's give it one more minute before we start our discussion. Uh, Hi, I see Roxana from Romania, Bucharest, hot summer. Hello. Uh, Dallas, Texas, rainy. Okay, hello. It's good to hear these comments. Good to see these comments coming in. Uh, yep. All right. I think it's about time. I think we can get started with our discussion. So, first off, welcome everyone. And thank you so much for joining on this LinkedIn Live session on rethinking value, that is, an adaptive and intelligent business models for the AI age. Uh, I'm Siddesh Mahadev, and I'll be moderating our discussion today. Uh, Today, we'll be focusing beyond the argument or the phrase, the headlines that we see that AI is changing everything, to explore more specific ways in which AI is enabling new business models. What that would mean for leaders that make decisions today. Joining me on this panel are Vinay Venkateshan and Gillian Walker. Gillian is a advanced SciTech team, and Vinay is a research director at Everest Group. You will hear their perspectives, examples from the field, and some sharp takes on where things are headed. Um, Also, along the conversation, if you have any questions or comments that you think would be interesting for all of us to hear, do add them in the chat box to the right. We'll either address them during the conversation, or if not, we can take them towards the end. Um, and before we dive into our discussion today, just a couple of housekeeping things. I would like to provide a bit of context into the work we do as a team here to introduce you to our Megaforces framework. Um, if we could bring up that the first slide over here. Yeah, perfect. This next one. Yeah. So our Megaforces framework is basically how we scan the horizon and make sense of long-term disruptive shifts covering technology advances and broader social, environmental, and economic forces that shape business strategy. Each of our four themes that you see on the left-hand side of the screen contain multiple megaforces and forces which are laid out in each of those boxes. Many of these are already in motion today and will continue to shape our society and business environments over the next 15 years. For the sake of our discussion today, we'll primarily focus on the first group. We'll focus on the forces along the business models and value networks adaptations to support some of our convictions that we have. So we have come with certain convictions and provocations for this discussion. And the four convictions, our discussion today, we have organized them into four convictions that we believe will shape the future of business models and value creation. Onto the next page, if we can move on. Yep. So these are the four convictions that we think, and we can center our discussion today around them. The first one is that AI is becoming deeply integrated into all the business operations and consumers' day-to-day lives, powering every process, product, and interactions. User experiences. The second one is that user experiences are getting hyper-personalized as a relation to things that are getting super integrated. It's getting hyper-personalized, and the commerce are becoming more invisible, where the transition between discovery, decisions, and purchase are blending into one common flow. The third conviction is that AI is reshaping the very logic how businesses are conducted, shifting from selling unit-based solutions to selling outcomes, performances, features, and experiences. And the last one, as a corollary to all the other three convictions, is, and we really wanted to bring it out separately, is that the traditional value chains are collapsing, and many people, many organizations, and many industries are requiring to rethink the way they create value and deliver, the way their businesses are run and deliver, create value. So we'll go through each of these convictions one by one, and I think we can start off with the first one. Um, the first conviction is and since we're deep diving, I think we can remove the screen. It could just be more of a conversational exercise. So yeah, the first one is that AI is becoming deeply integrated into business operations and consumers' daily lives, and we have well moved past the idea that AI is just a tool that enables. It's becoming embedded into the core of how organizations operate, how consumers experience the world. It is impacting businesses from autonomous decision making in supply chains to predictive personal assistants that shape our day-to-day choices. The technology is shifting from being a mere add-on to a core operational layer on businesses and day-to-day life. So, on that respect, I have a few thoughts to engage with Gillian and Vinay. So, Gillian, would you want to comment on what are some of the early signs that point to the idea that AI is no longer just a good-to-have tool or a feature, but more of a core capability in business contexts?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sadash. So I think to answer that question, we should start with just a couple of data points that we highlight in some of our recent research. So we know that as of 2024, so just last year, already more than half of organizations were already using AI in two or more business functions. And nearly 70% have claims that they plan to expand further their use of AI over the next few years. So, I think there's been a lot of buzz and a lot of articles and reporting recently around AI, the hype of AI or AI not like living up to its sort of promised potential. But when you hear data points like the ones I just mentioned, I mean, it's really clear that AI infusion, AI is going to remain a top initiative for business. It's just really hard to imagine that not being the case. And it's just because it's so early, just very early days, it's really just figuring out what that's going to look like. As I always kind of like to remind myself and what I hear quite frequently others saying, AI is as bad as it's ever going to be today. So as it improves, we're going to see more of the outcomes, the anticipated efficiencies that AI has been promised. So where can we see this? Okay, let's take something like supply chains as an application. So, we already have AI tools that are making real-time decisions about things like sourcing and logistics. So this could look like something like predictive risk management, assessing weather and how that might impact supply. It can look like things that we are already quite familiar with, route optimization, right? In healthcare, you have pharma companies that are using AI for clinical trial data, predicting how patients will respond to medications, and this speeds up research and development. And I think some of the consumer applications are really kind of the more fun and exciting, interesting use cases. So there's a company, Electronic Arts, in gaming that is tracking player behavior and adapting gameplay in real time in the moment using AI. That we look even more forward and further embeddedness into our day-to-day lives. I think what we're really going to see are things like, AI co-pilots, personalized AI co-pilots. So, you think of Alexa or Siri, but your own personal version that's becoming more of a touch point between you as a consumer and the brand. So, instead of just kind of scrolling through choices, that customers are going to begin relying on these assistants to filter their options, to adjust purchases, make decisions for them. So just becoming more and more embedded in day-to-day decision making. I think there's no question that AI is most definitely becoming a central part of how businesses operate, how people are going to experience products and services. It's just a matter of exactly what that's going to look like and the timing of it.
Yep, makes sense. The fact that you mentioned about agents and personalized agents, that begs me to another question: that do you think that the foundation to good user experience, as you think about these personal experience, would be data? Can you share some examples, if, where, and how AI is successfully enabling the capture of data and turning into something of value to customers?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that data is the foundation of the shift for AI. And AI, I mean, it works synergistically. AI is what makes data even more valuable. So again, something like 70% of organizations are investing in always on tools to capture more consumer data automatically. And then at the same time, what you're really starting to see is that consumers are increasingly willing to share that data. And here's the important point. They're willing to share that data when they see clear benefits in return to them. So, you asked for clear examples. Where could we see this? I think we can point to something like the automotive industry. We know that cars are becoming increasingly sensorized, and this allows for more and more tracking of data, whether that's data related to vehicle performance, but it could also be data on things like driver's health or the preference of passengers within the vehicle. And all of this data does really valuable things. It feeds into predictive maintenance. It can feed into driver health alerts. It can feed into real-time safety features. And, we could point to the example of Tesla, where you can port driver preferences between vehicles. So, the combination of data and AI is what's really, I think, exciting about moving forward, in the future. We could also take something like social media. This is a very clear example. Platforms like Instagram, capturing user signals, behavioral signals, clicks, pauses, likes, expressions, and using that to kind of tailor your feed, keep people engaged, give them more preferable content. So, when it really comes down to it, what matters here isn't just that data collection, but turning it into something useful for customers. And this is where I think AI will really create that value, but in real time, and even more anticipatory.
Makes sense. I have a slightly counter argument, but I think we can carry forward with that discussion. Is that while you are saying that AI will enable better data capture, there are also statistics or news outlets that say that they are restricting more and more of these search engines to block AI from accessing their resource, accessing their data. So I'm sure there are certain challenges that businesses would face in terms of acquiring some of this data. But so, Vinay, do you want to add to any of these arguments in time? So what are some of the challenges that businesses could face in terms of acquiring data, and how should they go about thinking about this challenge and generating that into value?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent question, Sudesh. I think Gillian's really set the stage beautifully with some brilliant and diverse examples. The way I see it, I think there are really four key examples to unpack. The first one really is around fragmentation. Data is today scattered in silos across, from a business standpoint, it could be marketing systems, CRM, supply chain tools. We spoke about AI agents, but also there's some kind of siloed, architecture around that as well. Most companies today still can't stitch this into one clean, usable pipeline. And without that, gleaning insights from AI is always going to be patchy. And I think it's still challenge number one for most enterprises. When I think about the other challenge, the second one is really around quality, right? The old, rule around garbage in, garbage out still applies. It's not just about having more data. We can see that, that's obviously, spiked over the last few years, but it's really now about having the right data. In fact, in our research, we report on hyper-personalization. We found that only 30% of the people are willing to share data for cash. But if you look at, sharing the data for experience, almost nearly half of them will share it if it improves their experience. So that tells us that if companies really don't turn raw data into real value, people could essentially stop sharing that. And then what happens is that your AI experience ends up looking very generic, no better than your competitors. The third really is around building that trust. And really it goes off from what I was talking about in the second challenge, is that the free-for-all days are really over. You see these regulations with GDPR, CCPA, and other data privacy laws. It really teaches us that you can't just hoard data in an unending manner. You need consent. You need to think about, how can you show people that sharing actually helps them? And another big question that is starting to surface is that, if my data creates value for your business, where does that leave me? Am I being fairly compensated for that? And in fact, we're exploring this very question a little deeper into our existing research on what is a concept on data as labor. The idea is that, as people produce data, the way workers produce output, then they also deserve to be compensated for it, right? So that is another question that's starting to come up as a challenge. And finally, I would add, the cost of compute, and obviously there is a cost to the compute capability that AI adds to that, right? So running these kind of advanced AI models is not cheap. And that's where we are seeing a lot of these examples of inference whales that's actually started to spring up quite a bit this year. Is that a few power users are generating tens of thousands of dollars in compute costs under very flat subscriptions. In fact, there was a very famous example that came up in the news around one coder that raked up about $35,000 of usage on a $200 plan, right? So that's really forced vendors to now start thinking about, well, how do you package this? How do you price this? And I hope we get an opportunity to really get down into that, as we go talking forward. But really, I think the summary is that, I think there's going to be a lot of focus on what we would call trust architecture, compliance architecture, clear consent processes, transparency about how data is used, and really strong governance that supports it. Of course, regulations will play a role in kind of setting up the bar, but that could be baseline, and then you exceed that based on how you differentiate your customer experience.
That's a valid. Yeah. Good. Sorry.
Yeah, can I just add just a couple of elements here too? Because I think that one thing we should consider is how AI itself and improvements in AI can improve the data quality. So we should be looking at this from the perspective of, okay, can AI become more discerning of the data it's using itself? What role does something like synthetic data come into play to augment artificial intelligence? And then, of course, there's all of the improvements around explainable AI. So being able to articulate AI itself, being able to articulate, how it's coming to conclusions, the data that it's using, all of these things. I think part of that narrative too is the anticipated improvements that we're going to see in AI itself that helps answer this data question.
No, those are both. I feel they both are valid points. I think as summary, I take away the fact that AI is generating. People will have to rethink how value is created from the data that is getting captured in order to really stand out from the rest, and also build that trust architecture in order to be capturing these data more in a more useful manner. Vinay, you mentioned about the compute costs while you were mentioning some of the challenges, and that begs me the question around how do you think value should be measured? And the reason I'm asking this question is, on one end, we are talking about the definition of new ways of generating value from data, which are quite unexplored. On the other hand, the inputs that go for generating this value from data is also getting is constantly evolving with larger compute costs and the costs of acquiring private data. So how do you think, since AI is so deeply embedded in both businesses and users' day-to-day life, it's becoming harder to track ROI. How do you think businesses should think about value measurements in the future?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad we're talking about this, and especially because of the fact that it's been in the news this week. I think the sense is that traditional ROI was straightforward, right? You invest, you implement, and then you measure. But AI, sadly, does not work that way, right? It's because it's so deeply embedded, and value is very much ongoing, and it's quite spread out across the applications that you implement it in, it's often not easy to put it into a kind of a very ROI-centric box. So our research shows that the companies that are using these kind of AI tools and pricing models have actually seen stronger gains than it being implemented elsewhere in the company. But those gains may not just show up as a single number. They will show up in other forms. It could be higher customer lifetime value or faster cycle times in getting the product or the solution to them, lower churn rates. So that's obviously not captured in the very typical ROI formula. But also, the fact that there is a paradox that is brewing up is that some big companies have obviously spent billions on generative AI, but the productivity gains have either not showed up or have been very modest. And this is what the Wall Street Journal ended up calling the productivity paradox. Surveys also show that about 70% of or over 75% of them, these projects underperform because they're typically rushed into production without just enough planning. In fact, another MIT study that I was reading just this morning talks about the fact that 95% of enterprise AI projects fail. And there are several reasons that it unpacks. The number one thing is obviously companies may not know how to integrate those into daily workflows, but also the fact that AI is still being poured into sales and marketing pilots, whereas the bigger returns could potentially be in process automation or new business models to improve your revenue streams. So ultimately, the truth is that ROI over AI is going to have to be long term. And in most cases, you're looking almost at an 18 to 24-month horizon before the benefits actually start to show up. I think where we go from here is that you really have to kind of recalibrate what do you want to see in terms of ROI in the short term, in the midterm, and in the long term. In the short term, it could be, does it make your process more efficient? In the midterm, it could be about how does it improve your customer outcomes? And potentially in the long term, that could show up in the sense that how are you generating this kind of competitive differentiation as a result of what you've been seeing in the short and the midterm, right? So I think there's obviously thinking that will need to evolve around how we track ROI and what are the metrics that we track in order to prove that AI has been really beneficial to us as an enterprise.
That's an interesting angle to take, because we're talking about. Is there a repetition of my voice? I think I'm okay.
I think
okay. All right. So that's an interesting idea to bring about how to look at ROI from different time periods in terms of short term, medium term, and long term, and defining them really smartly in terms of what are the realistic outcomes that you can achieve in each of them. That makes sense. I think we can switch gears to our second conviction, and because we spoke about personalization a couple of times in our conversation so far, the conviction is that user experiences will become very hyper-personalized, and the commerce will become more invisible, where the decision making to the purchase process gets blended into one flow. So we are clearly moving towards an era where products, prices, and even timing of purchases are uniquely shaped for each individual in real time, and where the act of shopping is dissolved into everyday interactions, meaning that we don't necessarily consciously make decisions in the moment in moment. Instead, products and services arrive to our doorstep as part of seamless, context-aware flow of life. So we talked up, and here's my thought here. We've talked about personalization for quite some number of years. What makes the AI-powered hyper-personalization fundamentally different from the recommendations engines of the past? Do we have any examples as such to discuss about it? Maybe Jillian, if you want to comment on it.
Sure. So how does hyper-personalization differ from what we've seen in the past, and some examples? Okay. So I think we can take a step back and talk about how something like really simply marketing or product development may have been done in the past. And that's around, coming up with a cohort segmentations, and kind of operating to the average, right? You're in a specific age group or a specific, regional group, something along those lines, and developing towards the average of this particular cohort. And when we move into the era of personalization, well, of course, things get a little bit more down to the individual. But when we talk about hyper-personalization, that's when we're really talking about the N=1 experience. So that is the experience tailored specifically to that individual. And I think importantly, in the specific context that that individual finds him or herself within at that particular given time. AI, of course, is really instrumental to this. Let's take a couple of examples. I think one really familiar example that people can relate to is with Netflix. So Netflix tailors the viewer experience all the way down, even down to the thumbnails that are showed to that particular viewer based on their viewing history and any kind of particular patterns that they like. They may, Netflix may pull out a scene that resonates with that past history, and it will do so in real time according to that individual viewer. We could take another example like Starbucks Deep Brew app. So that's their AI platform, and it's able to, understand consumer consumption history, but then also understand where that particular consumer is at a given point in time and place. So let's say it's hot, Sadesh, where you are, it's hot where I am. It may understand what the weather patterns are and understand your, personal history and make proactive suggestions to you. So I think, these are two really straightforward, simple examples, but when we think about AI-driven hyper-personalization, what we're thinking about is, again, understanding that individual in the particular context that that individual finds themselves in. And I think importantly, being proactive, being anticipatory of that particular user's needs. So it is much more about context, real time, and proactive anticipation.
That makes so much sense. Actually, I was not aware of the Netflix customizing your thumbnail, but that's interesting. So I see a point about how AI could bring in a richer context, context-aware personalization to the personalization journey. But what would you think would happen in the next 5 to 10? What would have to happen in the next 5 to years for this level of hyper personalization to be a default experience? Right now, we see a few fringe organizations, not fringe, but leading organizations to be doing this. But what would have to happen for this to become more of a default experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Vinay kind of articulated one of the barriers or challenges that has to be overcome, which is that the data sources need to be of good quality. They need to expand, and that means there's going to have to be trust built in the system. So we talked earlier about increasing potential of increasing regulations, clamping down on the data that AI can access. Well, how do we get around that? That is the kind of opt-in model, right? And so to do that, to expand those data sources, not only is there going to be more sort of exchange of, there's monetary compensation or whatnot to access data sources, but more proving the value to the user so that the data sources can be tapped into. So expanding the data, expanding the quality of the data, ensuring that there is trust in the AI systems and in the platforms that are using that data. Again, I think things like explainable AI, but also more transparency in how data is being used will go a very long way in accomplishing that, as well as, of course, when users see free beverages, popping up on their app for Starbucks, then that creates the kind of loyalty and desire to use platforms that then collect data. And then I think the other thing is we're looking very much, a little bit out. We talked a little bit earlier about the potential for there to be individual or personalized AI cohorts or AI co-pilots that are able to operate on the behalf of an individual. Well, in order for that kind of reality to happen, so that you get not just hyper personalization kind of fed to you, but also you can have your hyper personalized co-pilot operate on your behalf or negotiate on your behalf or make orders on your behalf. Is there's going to have to be a level of interoperability among these various systems in order to see that kind of cooperation among co-pilots, if you will. But I do think when these conditions come together, when these conditions come together, and I do, I'm very optimistic that they will, better data, better trust, orchestration, and interoperability, then that will become, blended into everyday life seamlessly.
Makes sense. So the arguments that you posed make sense. I do have a follow-up question, and it relates back to what Vinay was talking about data a little while ago. When these transactions become so invisible, meaning that AI agents or embedded machines, they look into how consumers behave and decide on their behalf. Do you think there is a risk of an overreach? That is, how do you think that businesses should stay on the right side of the value versus privacy equation as they are gathering more and more of these data to make more personalized and better decisions for them?
Yeah, in fact, I was actually thinking about just the same thing when, Gillian, you were walking us through the examples that, when commerce becomes so invisible, the line between what's considered convenience and what's considered intrusion or creepy, gets blurry, right? So on one hand, you could have, a high level of seamlessness where I think it was NBC Universal and LG who partnered to kind of bring shoppable TV earlier to viewers, where people can just buy directly from their, TV remote, whatever their favorite character is wearing. Right. And so the whole idea around discovery, decision, and then purchase becomes seamless, right? So they don't exist in silos as different experiences. I mean, that's invisible commerce done responsibly because the user still knows what's happening, what are they tuning into, what are they buying, right? But that also, on the other hand, raises questions as to, who is really making the decision to buy? Is it you or your machine? Is it the AI? What kind of guardrails can you establish around that? And I'm reminded of another example a few years ago where Alibaba actually created Alipay, which is a smile to pay facial recognition feature. So you could basically smile and it will register a transaction. You could think about that as fast and frictionless, but for many people, that's an intrusion of privacy. That could immediately spark concerns around, surveillance, potentially mass surveillance, and, lack of consent, right? So I think we have to get to a point where a lot of what happens in invisible commerce is trust first, which means, transparency, consent, very easy ways to opt out become a lot more flexible. So consumers at any point of time have the ability to say, well, hold on 1 second, I did not authorize that, or override it, or just say no thanks, right? So I think they also need to be able to trust the signals that they see, in terms of brands being a lot more eloquent and open about why are you seeing this, and this is AI generated or this is not AI generated, right? So it gives them a level of comfort as to when they're dealing with these kind of systems. I think where businesses will likely optimistically go from here is that they would want to establish plain language guardrails around what can customers allow the AI to buy, what are some of the spending limits that they can authorize the agent with, and why a certain product was recommended, which goes back to the explainability element that we talked about earlier. So if we are supposed to make transactions invisible, you also need to be able to make them explainable and reversible. Right, so that's where I believe the next evolution will at least have to be and will need to be thought through.
That makes sense. So basically, we are talking about more explainable and more guardrails for better communication with people whom we are gathering data from to err on the side of caution. We have a question on the chat, and it preemptively talks about the following conviction that we had. And it's basically, I don't know if we could be able to answer that question right away, or if we not, we can bring that answer it later on. The question says, how can we use AI to build your own AI strategy aligned to business strategy? That's a very interesting question, but that always that does bring our conversation to the next conviction is around AI is fundamentally changing the very logic of business models. It's shifting from thinking about selling unit-based solutions to selling outcomes, performances, features. It's enabling companies to go beyond units or product sales towards models that monetize ongoing value, where its performance or outcome guarantees personalized features, unlock over time, and tailors user experience to each user. This could fundamentally change how revenue is earned and how customer relationships are structured in the long term. Gillian, do you know what are some of the compelling examples you see AI enabling businesses to sell outcomes or performances rather than units? And if you want to add to Jeremy's question, if AI can be used to build AI strategies for your business strategy, I mean, I think it's a pretty open-ended question that way. You're on mute.
Julian, can you get off mute?
Sorry. Yes, and I think that is Jeremy's question is the promise of AI, right? That at some point AI it becomes kind of the flywheel and builds on itself and becomes, it begins to optimize itself and contribute to its own future development. And I think, it goes back to the fundamentals of you have the right data. Are you giving it the right direction? And are you asking it the right questions, right? And that is the beginning to how data AI can start improving upon itself and being pivoted towards particular applications like using AI to build your own AI strategy. To your question, Sadesh, on business models shifting to outcomes, I think this is where outcomes or performance or experience based. This is, I think, again, kind of early days, but one of the really bright spots of where we're seeing AI creating real transformation. So you can see this happening already where companies are experimenting or moving away from selling kind of like units or licenses, those kinds of models, to attaching revenue to results or outcomes. And I think a really good example of that is Zendesk. So, just last year, it introduced outcomes-based pricing for its AI agents. So instead of charging per user, Zendesk charges based on the number of customer inquiries resolved. And that shifts cost directly to outcomes or directly to performance. Another good example is Globant, which lost AI pods. And that is that whole kind of services as software approach. So here, we see the subscriptions to AI-powered teams for software engineering and design. And this is instead of billing by the hour, the clients are charged based on the tickets or tokens consumed, reflecting kind of the actual AI usage. So it's capturing actual usage in real time. And I think that's another thing that AI is able to do to unlock and back to being able to demonstrate transparency, especially in pricing and things along those lines. You need that kind of real-time assessment of how services are performing so that you can enable these types of business models. So, I think the theme here is that AI is making it possible to measure performance in real time. And this opens the door for all sorts of new experimentations with pricing based on things like outcomes, performance, usage, results, things like that.
That makes sense. And will this in any way change how businesses package and price these new business models? I'm sure as we think about outcomes, there should be different ways in which businesses should think about pricing their products or selling their service packages. Vinay, if you want to briefly respond to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I might just add to what Jeremy was asking about in terms of, how can you align your own strategy with your business strategy? I think it goes back to the fact that, the number one point is the objective is to really chase value and not returns. right? So if you're talking about, how can you build your own strategy, it's really about, what kind of use cases do you want to pursue in order to get to the right outcome, right? And if you were to apply the same kind of logic to your business, is that, what kind of value do you want to generate? Is it efficiency? Is it, automating tasks so that you can kind of not do a certain few steps as part of your workflow, or ultimately it is returns? It can be all three, but it definitely needs very different focus, a different bunch of tools, different resources, and so on and so forth. So I think that kind of thinking is is quite critical in terms of, what use cases do you want to change in order to get the value that you want to really unlock, right? And really, to your point, Sudesh, and I think it kind of ties back to what we've been discussing about, especially with the example that Julian pointed out around Zendesk, is that we're already seeing packaging and pricing models change. In the past, you kind of sold fixed bundles. It's a lot more now about modular, dynamic, usage-based pricing. And the other thing is, of course, I mean, if you take streaming, for example, subscription fatigue is a real challenge. In fact, we saw that in our research that about 2/3 of US consumers say they just can't afford all of their services, right? And the response to that has been quite swiftly, I might add, is micro subscriptions. In fact, very recently, Sling TV, launched a day, a week pass, a weekend pass, just so that people can really dip in and out. Let's say you have a sports event that you want to watch, and you don't have to commit to a monthly plan, right? And the same thing is happening in the business space, where instead of buying massive software suites that you have to pay for on a monthly basis, companies can now subscribe to micro SaaS platforms that are very specifically built to a specific team or a specific use case, right? So there's a lot of kind of restructuring of logic going around there. And really the big picture is that, you have to keep analyzing usage patterns that kind of build on these bundles or pricing models in order to unlock that. And it's really important to think that pricing is becoming a lot more context sensitive, right? So instead of having it at very unit based, like it's X dollars per seat per month or Y dollars per usage, it's going to be a lot about chasing outcomes, chasing performance, chasing retention.
Got it. Makes sense. You touched upon some of the interesting business models, like micro bundling. I think you also mentioned software defined packaging, software defined products somewhere earlier. So we briefly touched upon these products becoming more software defined and continuously updated. What are the customer expectations? How are they going to change in terms of support, upgrades, and pricing?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think software-defined models has been a game changer in that sense. That, of course, we know about software-defined from, it originated in the telecom industry. Then now everybody knows about software-defined vehicles. In essence, what it is that you're decoupling hardware from software. It then entirely changes how customers see products, right? It's no longer these kind of one-time purchases. It's a product that keeps giving over time. So you have a longer relationship with that product, right? So it's ultimately built on, I would say, three expectations. One is that there's a sense of continuity, that the fact that the product can be upgraded over time and people expect it to keep getting better, right? So if we look at the famous example of Apple, the reason why they shifted to services is that, then they can kind of build on top of that. And now that takes up about a quarter of their revenue. The fact that people want more flexibility so that they can personalize it to what they really need and what, unsubscribe what they don't need, right? Stripe is a great example. They do it for payments processing, where they can basically just very flexibly, you don't have to buy a new device. It basically just replaces point of sale machines and just kind of updates the software on top of that, right? So there's no need to buy more point of sale devices. And then finally, the third point is really about fairness. And this is where I think we should learn about, it's a great lesson to learn about, what BMW did before. People were pretty miffed with the company because BMW was essentially charging for heated seats, which is a capability that already exists within the vehicle, right? So the lesson learned is people will pay for new value, but they may not be very open to pay for things that they already believe has capability when it was delivered to them. So it's a fine line between, how do you prove that balance in terms of value and what do you really charge to the consumer. So I think there's also a real need for pricing to think about that as well, as to how often do you see a product that will need to improve? How often do you think you will roll out updates, and then what kind of tiers can you really provide in terms of making it the most flexible and friendly to customers to use?
That makes sense. And as you mentioned about the BMW example, where you could provide over-the-air updates to vehicles. It actually ties back to the next conviction we were thinking about. As these things happen, as more and more business models like prosumerism or software-defined products, they come about, it's going to break the traditional value chains, and businesses need to think about how to create and deliver value in new ways. It's dismantling, almost AI is dismantling the older linear value chain, compressing steps, removing intermediaries, and almost redefining it into more of a network than chains. We are seeing boundaries between industries blurring, and networks that deliver value also, it's no longer remaining a chain, it's becoming more of a network. What would Jillian, according to you, what would be some of the clearest indicators that the chain in a given industry is about to unravel?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. And there are some things we can point to that show us how this is happening. I think probably the clearest, example that we could point to is something like direct to consumer. So of course, now that we have so much e-commerce, the ability to bypass distributors, wholesalers, all of that, and go direct to the consumer is becoming, more interesting. It's becoming more prevalent. We're starting to see that move away from just retail into industries like, let's say, pharma, where we have something like a platform, Pfizer for All, where you can have Pfizer ship your medications directly to you. So going straight from the manufacturer to the patient. And there are really good reasons for that. One, there is a convenience element, but again, back to the data, it gives Pfizer access to data that it probably wouldn't have had before. So you're seeing a lot of that movement where folks who may be upstream are trying to go further downstream to create those connections that are needed. I think at the same time, what you're seeing in a lot of kind of value networks, and I really do think we should think of them like that moving forward, that it's not linear, it's a web of relationships. What you're seeing is that there's a recognition, especially with technologies like artificial intelligence, and even as we look further down the road, things like quantum computing, whatnot, that no one has one piece of the puzzle or the whole puzzle. They all have just pieces of the puzzle, and that everybody needs to be talking with each other to make outcomes work. And so that's another element of that collapse, right? That no longer can you just have, that chain of conversation around development. Everybody needs to be talking with each other and collaborating at the same time. And so that's another kind of way in which we see these value networks manifest. So, I mean, yes, we can point to things like D2C. We can point to things like, prosumers, that moving, has its roots in kind of the energy sector, being able to produce your own energy, but sell it as well. But we see it, on things like YouTube, right? You're producing your own entertainment and consuming it. We see it in platforms like Nike by You, where you can design shoes and sell them. But I think what we're starting to see here, and this is facilitated by connectivity, is that those value chains are beginning to fold in on of themselves and create that kind of network effect. And I think artificial intelligence, if we want to bring it back to that conversation, is only going to amplify that type of relationship.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. We have one more question from Jeremy, and I'll use that question to build on that question a little bit and ask to Vinay. So Jeremy's question says, in your experience, what are the three big use cases for SMEs through AI adoption? But I'll build on that in saying that, as Gillian mentioned about some of the new business models that are coming through, like prosumerism or like decentralized organizations, the roles of these intermediaries, who are more often than not the SMEs in most cases, how do you think this role of these intermediaries are disappearing? What do you think? How can these traditional intermediaries, such as distributors, wholesalers, brokers, they should adapt themselves to find new relevance in a way, in an age where AI defines a lot of these interactions? And yeah, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I'll probably start with addressing Jeremy's question first. And my view is that most SMEs are really not chasing very kind of big, shiny, futuristic use cases with AI. Essentially, what they're really doing is to see, what's the best possible way is that AI can kind of free up hours for me, cut admin costs, look more professional to customers. I think one of the use cases that I've frequently come across is, how they're using AI to improve the customer support and engagement teams, right? So, whether it's enabling chatbots and virtual agents that can very quickly pull up information for their customers. Let's say you're boarding a flight, you don't want to go through emails. You just very quickly ask a customer agent that they can kind of send you, an AI agent, and it could very quickly summarize, here's the gate you need to be in, here's where you're going, here's where your seat is, and all of that stuff, and you're done, right? And then you have a human in the loop, then if you have certain escalations on the request. But essentially, it's really to ensure that your customers have a very seamless experience with the company. The second one is marketing and sales enablement, which is where companies like HubSpot, for example, they have their own AI campaign assistants that can now write and roll out content a lot more automatically, a lot more frequently, so that you consistently keep the customer engaged. And then ultimately, I think this is where the real value lies, is back office automation. Obviously less glamorous, but incredibly valuable in terms of its ability to kind of provide cascading benefits, right? So we talked about Skype, we talked about Stripe, that enables it to have these kind of software-based models run at the back end, so that you can have a product that consistently keeps updating. That's kind of one example on how you can implement automation and then bring that straight to the customer. But these are some of the avenues that I think SMEs are really working towards. In response to your question, which I believe was around intermediaries, the way I think intermediaries, of course, they're not going to disappear overnight. They're not just going to vanish. They will, I believe, evolve, precisely because of the fact that they've had such long-standing relationships with their customers, right, with their end consumers. And they obviously know what they're looking for a lot more, in an intimate way than businesses do, or enterprises do, right? So I think there are few ways in which they can think about how to evolve. One could be that you could almost certainly become a kind of a third-party certifier, because as more and more AI agents enter, kind of mainstream use cases, someone will need to kind of ensure that it's providing the right kind of quality, providing the right kind of compliance, trust. So you could almost have a third-party intermediary certify the experience that the customers are having, and whether or not they should be interacting with a certain agent and availing a product or a solution. The other thing is experience enhancement, right? Because of the fact that, and I go back to the fact that they've had such long, relationships with the end consumers, providing the experiences that they really look forward to and putting that in a bundle becomes a lot more intuitive for intermediaries as opposed to, direct to enterprises. Of course, there will be a certain category that is still D2C, which is fine, but there will also be a category that are better known as experience orchestrators. And the third is really a model that we've all known for a long time, is the fact that if you're able to stitch two people together, like in a marketplace setting, where an Amazon does that today, does it very well, that's also another avenue. So ultimately, it's really about them asking themselves, are we still slated to be a middleman? If so, writing's on the wall. If not, where is the best possible way in which we can evolve in order to bring in more value to the end consumer? And that's really where I think they really need to be thinking about.
Makes sense. Absolutely. I know we are about 5 minutes left from the timeline, but I just wanted to highlight to everyone attending and listening, we are making available a complimentary copy of our pulse on prosumer led business models, because we spoke about prosumerism a couple of times in the conversation today. We think it might be quite useful for all of us to look into it. It's a great resource. It goes deeper into the research and examples we have discussed today. We are, of course, available for further discussion after this conversation. But really, I wanted to summarize, I think while our audience is able to access this, I wanted to connect with the two of you. I think the forces we discussed today are really unfolding. And in the next 2 to 3 years, this will define it will define and shape how business models are operating, how customers experience, and would have big implications for businesses to act today. But if I were to ask each of you to give one final reflection on the subject that we're discussing around how AI is enabling new business models, what would that be?
I mean, I think the thing that I would say, and maybe this is cliche, but not to fear AI. I mean, I think this recognition that artificial intelligence is kind of the way that the world is headed, and there's no putting the genie back into that bottle. And so understanding that the best thing that I think organizations can do is embrace it and find the optimal way of putting it to action. And I think that goes for, employees and workers as well. So I would say, coming to understanding that, and then taking the steps that you need to really truly infuse AI into your organization for optimal benefit. I think the only other thing that I would just note here is that given the potential and the possibilities for artificial intelligence, to understand that it now opens up the purview of who you think your competitors are, right? So, maybe you thought that they were a services company, but now you have startups that are creating artificial intelligence that can come in and do those services. So you have to be hyper aware that the scope of who you are competing against and how they are operating themselves is, influencing the market so that you yourself can stay current.
Yeah, absolutely. No, makes sense. Vinay, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, if there's just one thing I could add is, and I'm reminded of this quote from a famous Indian movie that you might have watched, is that if you chase excellence, success will follow. But if you put that into AI's kind of language, is if you chase value, revenue will follow. And if you're chasing value, then you probably need to think through where exactly is it best applicable. What are the real use cases? What are the resources that I need? Rather than saying, hey, my competitor is already pouring in hundreds of millions of dollars. So, what, I really need to do that. Which also brings me back to, Julian's point. Yes, of course, you don't fear it, but you can't afford to sit by the sidelines. So you better have a strategy, and you better have it today. Right. So that's what I would
absolutely.
leave it with.
Absolutely, that's wonderful. And I think we are in the last minute of our time today. If our panels have any question, please drop them on the comment box as you see on the right-hand side of the screen. We'll try to answer them. I think we are almost on time here, if not on the conversation, but we can always take them offline. Julian, Vinay, and myself, we are more than happy to connect with you. You are more than welcome to connect with us offline. We'll be happy to take this conversation outside. Overall, the discussion was quite insightful. It brought in a different perspective than the idea that AI is everywhere, and bring in a more holistic perspective in terms of how businesses should react and what are the future of how AI might impact businesses. thank you very much, all our audience, first of all, and thank you, Vinay and Gillian, for this wonderful time. I look forward to more such conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Lillian.